Hello World. This is actually the title of my talk today. I would like to thank Dietmar for the introduction and for the invitation. And I would like to test something out with you, because I didn't bring any PowerPoint or paper to read. I'm prepared, but I'm not, didn't bring this kind of stuff. Wait a second. But I would like to share notes with you, and I will try to make these notes live on the web. So what I'm using for that is a platform that I founded 5 years ago that's called the Research Catalog. And it's, when you log in, you can easily produce sites. So what we will do now, it's called an exposition. And I will make a few notes while we're here, and then I will upload the images later so you can follow it, and there will be a screening of, a filming of today. So you have it then at your hand. My talk will be in 3 parts. And the first one is about 5 minutes, the next one is about 10 minutes, and then the third one is also 10 minutes, so I stay in time, hopefully. And the title of the first section is called Where is the World? So where is the world? Can you read it, or should I make it bigger? Yeah, maybe we should make it bigger. I almost need my glasses because it's really like bigger. Yeah. You. And to get it online, we have to share it for the moment too. So let's see, hello world, share, anyone on the internet, submit, so now we are online. Okay, in the art world we know a long discussion on representation versus non-representation. Which is actually the first note I would like to add to it. And as you know, there has been a big fight about the question of realism, or the question on is a picture should be figurative or abstract. And it's still an ongoing fight whether art should be representative or not. For me, it is clear that both extremes, neither figurative nor abstract, are the solution for the problem. I think art is about building a poetic space, and for that kind of poetic space you need a certain referentiality or a certain realism. So I would say art is real in a way, even though it's not real in the mimetic sense, or at least that has been one of the concerns when I was making art. But I think art needs to be real to trigger imagination and not for communication. And indexicality might be a good wording for what I do. Let's see. I'm not a philosopher, I have to say also, so I don't know the discourse around the word, and some of my wording is dangerous, as I know. But at least I studied Latin and Greek in school, so etymology is familiar to me. And if we have a look on the word index, it's interesting to see what it all means. It has a big range of meaning. First, it's the one who points out. It's a discloser, a discoverer, an informer, a witness. Another description is it's an informer, a sign, a token, the forefinger, a title, a touchstone. Or you could say even he or that which points out, a pointer, an indicator. Again, the forefinger, I think that's an interesting one. Let's add that too. It's in general an index, a sign, a mark, an indication, a proof. It's one who indicates, who discloses, a discoverer, a director, a guide, an informer, a discloser, a witness. Especially in a bad sense, it's an informer, a betrayer, a spy. An index is a title, a superscription. It can be a catalog, a table, a list, a summary. If you look on paintings or statues, an index is an inscription, and it can be an index of a touchstone. So index is actually ambivalent. It is on the one hand a pointer, but on the other hand a betrayer, and I have to say that sounds good to me. And there's also another aspect I like about it. Dietmar gave already the hint to Peirce, where he uses the three categories of symbol, index, and icon, and he defines index as the real connection with its objects. So add that too, real connection with its object. So that's my first part. So we go now to the second part, which is called number 2. Wait a second. I imagine, you imagine. So Dietmar asked me to speak a little bit about an older work of mine, which is from 15 years ago, I have to confess. It's called auditory seismology. It was mentioned already in the introduction, so he really insists on it. And it works with seismometers, and you showed an image, so I feel very much forced now to speak about that work. So let's add that to kind of give us the title of it. It's auditory seismology. I will clean that up later, if you don't mind. So maybe I should start with a little bit of a technical background. Seismic data, as most of you know probably, are the measures of the movement of the ground. And this is in a way abstract because nobody sees or feels or smells it usually if you are in a low, but there's steady movement going on. And these data usually are visualized. We also already saw that in a way. But you can, and you could say, well, this visualization is kind of to adapt this natural phenomenon to the human senses and to allow us to study it. So, but you can also not only visualize these data, any data can be also audified, meaning making that hearable, or like we yesterday had, the data cuisine, and we will hear about later, you can make it eatable only also. So what I mean is that we have the choice of the medium always how we want to study the data. We can study data visually, acoustically, tactile, even though through taste and smell. But having that choice, in my case, when I use sound to study seismic data, it is also on the purpose because sound is very close to the phenomenon, because it has the same physics. So the physics of sound and the physics of the Earth's movement is both elastomechanics, and so you could say the phenomenon is quasi-acoustic. So what do? Is I take these data and then amplify the movement, and then I'm also playing them faster because it's inaudible, so that makes it very easy to listen to it. And we will start now with one example to listen to it, which is also online, so anybody can hear that. Is the sound running? So what you hear here is a station in Russia, and you hear a full day of seismic activity of the Earth compressed into a little bit less than a minute. And this kind of interface allows you to make a circumnavigation around the Earth. So you will always listen to the same day of the Earth, and then you can go eastwards or westwards and simply listen to it. And here are the coordinates, so you even can check where you are, and so on and so on. So actually I can try that. If you go on so you see the station is pretty much in the middle of nowhere. And actually it's in here. And at least you can reach it with the car if you want to. Anyway, so what you could say, it's kind of using a stethoscope that listens to always the same day of activity of the Earth. Well, now you could say, well, or for me, that's pretty much design. What makes it art? For me, well, I have actually a different interest in that material, and that has to do with first. I think what is interesting for me is to trigger the imagination that the Earth is a sounding body. So I'm not so much interested only into making it better access, but it is about how does it feel like to live on a sounding body that makes to me a big difference from the blue marble. And we actually had an interesting discussion, I think 2 years ago in Berlin. There was this conference, the Whole Earth Catalog, and they were complaining about the effect that this blue marble photograph in '69 had on our culture, which is really surprising after centuries of having a globe at home. You see a globe and everybody is excited about it, and it starts environmental science and has all this effect. And they were complaining about the bad effects of this blue marble as well. So it's not only that it makes more easy, but it's like it makes it handleable and so on and so on. And I was wondering how you can trigger a different imagination. And the interesting thing about listening to the Earth is that you never get the whole, because you're always listening from a certain point, but there is no sweet spot. There's no it's not there. You don't have an Archimedean point to listen. You can have a point to look. You can have the whole globe in one, but you cannot listen to it. So there's always an individual perspective, which I like about it. And then it's not only imagination. I think also for me, because as Dietmar mentioned, I studied some time in science, and I have to say, forgive me, but I find a certain scientific naivety in what is the medium you're working with. So there is a certain blindness very often in what it does when you go simply to the visual, if you go to audio, or and so on. So in a way, and there's a big search for neutral. We want neutral representation. So what the fuck is neutral, right? So we see in the history of science in the last 500 years, a lot of scientists start with I investigated, and today everybody says it is apparently like this, and so on and so on. So there is a move towards a certain neutrality, and I think that's naive to assume that there will ever be a neutrality. The other thing I found also very funny when I was studying geophysics, my professor was very proud. He's really actually is quite a coryphée in his field in earthquakes, and he was very proud that he had done I don't know 5 or 8 years research for his habilitation, which comes after the PhD, and he wrote it down in 2 weeks. And I was speaking to other colleagues in science, and I said, how is your master going? And they said, oh, I've done all the research, I simply have to write it down. And this simply writing down was always so strange to me, because I think writing down is not simply. I mean, it's making the thing in a way. So when you start audifying seismic data, it's a little bit, it's like smuggling in a Trojan horse or so, because I would like to raise the question of mediality of data representation, which is part of what you are doing here today as well. So in a way, you could say my PhD was about the influence of the medium on understanding what is an earthquake. That was the title of the PhD. And I think there is actually not an answer to it. You only have to, you can make choices, and then you follow these choices. Good. There's another website where you can study the auditory seismology thing that has a number of examples. Okay, we'll do that later. And there you can hit certain things. I do that later. So index, we often think that there is a natural phenomenon that needs to be made visible, and then we build an instrument that has a hand like on the clock, which shows us its status. So the instrument gives us access to the invisible, the unhearable, and you could say it connects us to the world that is beyond the limits of our senses. But as we just saw, they do more. Instruments trigger imagination. They direct their finger from the factual into the fictional, and this is what I call the poetry of the real. And actually, isn't it nice why I'm presenting here this, that when you kind of have to make a link, there is actually an index up there, very small. There's this hand kind of holding up the index finger. So that is my second example, and I'm now going to the third one. Which I call I touch reality, and reality touches me. It's a fresh work that is not from 15 years ago, but it's ongoing. It has no data, no instruments, but it's still searching for the poetry of the real. Meanwhile, I'm stepping out of formulating something about something. Instead, I try to articulate for the time and for the moment. Today, we are here, so we have to find out what is the right thing to articulate here and now, and how we can give form to the forces that are present. So my art practice at the moment is about building an arena, a stage, something where things can show up. And the example I brought is called spaces out of delay. And it's actually triggered by a phenomenon when you go into caves. And I really like I don't know if anybody else also likes to go to caves. I really love caves. Because when I'm looking into a cave, I see a lot of material transport going on there. You have the limestone that is dissolved by water, and it's kind of pulled down. And this kind of constant process, even though it's very, very slow compared to human time, it is still, you can see, in a flow. And while the ceiling is dripping, the floor is dropping. Now, the interesting thing for me is that the floor sinks faster than the ceiling, meaning that because of that kind of material flow and the speed difference, you produce a space. And this space is kind of on a run. It is not really stable, and it's neither a typical shell like this building here, which is built against gravity, so the space is formed by that, nor is it a kind of a hole which you kind of dig into the ground, and because there you have to pull the material before you. No, you look down on the ground and you see the material sinking down. So you could say these caves are neither a hole nor a shell, but the delay articulates within spatial terms. So I've written a text on that tries to describe this view and this concern. And last autumn, I was starting to collaborate with Tommy Wolfensberger, who is like the master and authority in lithographs. And lithographs is a printing technique that uses limestone and water. So I was interested in can I somehow use these printing stones in trying to understand what is going on in the cave. So could I reenact these processes from the cave on the printing stone, and how can I combine limestone, water, and time? This is not very common in lithograph usually, because usually they were invented in the 19th century to keep the autograph of the printer, of the artist. So it was and I'm not interested in my kind of gesture. I'm interested in the stone itself. And while we're talking, we can let that run, where you can see. So I developed 4 different techniques of working with it, and what came out of it is a kind of different series. Some of them you can see later tonight. They are physical processes that I started on the limestone, and then I always let time in between to let things articulate. So what do I see these prints are like? I don't see them, or I see them as traces of my thinking about caves. As I see them as a form of physical notes or material thinking. And even though I'm in the tradition of conceptual art, I deeply believe in non-verbal forms of thinking. So I'm not exclusively in the verbal, but also in the non-verbal. So these prints are for me a form of externalized conversation. They are a form of rethinking, re-experiencing, reenacting, and observation. And in this sense, you might say that this approach of non-verbal thinking proves to be critical on Western European tradition of res cogitans versus res extensa, because as you know from Descartes, the world is divided into the thinking and the res extensa are the things that have space, but I have to say thinking has space too. There is no thought that is not occupying space. So in that sense, for me, it makes no sense to split them. I think we have to allow the simultaneity of thought, space, and material reality. And I think I stop here. 2 more minutes for questions. No, thank you.